Okay, I think it's good.
Okay. Um, so yeah, this is Ray and I's presentation. One of our group members isn't with us anymore, but we're just gonna do it ourselves, us two. So to start off, for the discussion questions, um, part A is the Shakers earn a 5 on the socioeconomic spectrum compared with the later experiments of economic equality. They did well economically. Their communities also survived a long time, well over a century. All these despite their refusal to procreate. So, how did they make it work economically? So, we said kind of at the start, it was a more of like a smaller movement, but earlier on they started moving around and like trying to find they started traveling around New England to try and find more people, and they ended up being successful in doing so. Um, so that was basically the earlier start of like how they were able to gain traction. I think it was said after they went on their travels, they gained like over 1,000 people to join them in their settlement. So yeah, they basically spread their views to as many people as they could in order to explain what their religious message was. And in turn, once they started getting believers, part of joining was that the converted believers would have to sell everything that they could for the good of the community. So that would mean like houses, livestock, like whatever they really could to like contribute. And that would kind of like in turn kind of be like their way in. At least that was my understanding. And what basically happened after that was that more people continued to like find out about this community that was like building sustained wealth for the good of the community over time, and this basically just ended up making like more and more people interested in it. And it made them over time actually switch from rural solidarity of before they wanted to practice collectivism, which was kind of like what they did before in a sense, but like I think they were going all in on it in terms of like basically like everything that they did was for the good of their people, and like everything was equally distributed among everybody. And like while they were doing this, like they ended up being getting an abundance of goods and services, and they basically had enough, and they were so specialized in it in doing so and making all these things that like other people, like outsiders that weren't a part of the Shakers, wanted to like basically like have some of their goods and services because they were so good at making it compared to everybody else. And this ended up being like the reason why they were able to sustain themselves like economically for so long. Um, another key part of it was while they were doing this economically, they were also like never taking any days off, which I think was something that stood out to me. I think it was said on page 57 that my notes say, and it was basically like explaining that like even on holidays, like they never took any days off, which I think is like a big feature that like not a lot of people understood, but like that was like one of their main things. And at the start of this community, Mother Ann was the primary figure that made all the decisions for the community. But after she passed, the new leader was James Whittamaker. Um, wait, I'm going on to part B now. I'm talking about we're going on to governance spectrum. So now turn to the governance spectrum. Before we do that, do you want to add anything for A? Right?
Um, I feel like you touched on a lot of it. I focused a lot on their like economic success. Their focus was on their communal living and hard work because I feel like they almost believed in the concept of like putting their hands to work, and they lived in these close communities where they all shared property and labor, so it allowed them to use all their resources and like minimize waste efficiency, which was big for them. And Yeah, I feel like they were known for like their skilled craftsmanship as well, and their products were in high demand from like outsiders. And I think a quote I had that just explained some of the products they had in demand were just the mobs of drunken patriots had been replaced with Gentiles eager to buy Shaker seed flat brooms and medicine. So that was just an example. And this income they had coming from these products also helped them to sustain their communities by allowing them to purchase their like new supplies that they need to make these products that continued their work. And yeah, they also practice like I think a lot of agriculture, and I don't know, they had a lot of just key concepts around minimal waste. And yeah, I think it just economically they're like through their commitment to hard work and communal living, their and craftsmanship, innovated farming techniques, and like their simple lifestyles allowed them to just sustain the communities they had and live like their life of simplicity and self-sufficiency. So
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think you brought up like a great point with like minimizing waste because I think that was one of the reasons based on what I read of why like they were so abundant in like everything that they had, and they were able to like be able to like sell to people outside of their community because of that. So yeah, that was a good point. Um Now going on to the governance spectrum, the Shakers face the dilemma that all profit-led movements have to face eventually. Once their leader dies, how does the Shaker governance evolve over time? So as I started earlier, when it first started, Mother Ann was the primary figure that made all decisions for the community. And then over time, she wasn't really around for that much, but obviously as the first leader of this community, she was very well known, very powerful. So after Ann Lee, she appointed a new leader, or she planned on appointing a new leader, and this guy ended up being James. I think it's called Whittaker or Whittaker. I don't know how to pronounce it, but the thing that was different with him that Anne couldn't do was he could read and write. So he started to write down Mother Anne's gospel for basically like future generations to be able to like learn who the who the original leader was at the start. And a couple of years after this happened, he died, making a man named Meacham the new leader. And Meacham was known for the as the founder of Shakerism, and with that he brought new customs, institution, and like this formal hierarchy that ended up basically being like the form of governance that they lived by for like almost the entire time. Yeah, basically he created a form of government and like rules to follow for all Shakers to follow. And after this, Meacham was like the primary father, and he wanted to appoint a woman to be as an equal or like second in command and power because they were big on gender equality, very progressive for the time. And he appointed this woman named Lucy Wright, and yeah, the co-elder of Lebanon, first lady after himself as the first man at the top of the hierarchy, and kind of tying in with the first one of economic sustainability. One of the main like forms of governance that they did was they transferred from rural solidarity to practice collectivism and like equally distributing all of their wealth equally among them. I think that was like a big step for them. And on page 62, it talks more in depth about the four-tier hierarchy, which governed the rapidly growing Shaker communities. My understanding is that Meacham and Lucy had the final say when it came to making decisions and answering questions regarding customs and like rules to follow, or like new rules to follow, I guess, that other settlements wanted to incorporate into their communities. But it was like the elders and eldresses that actually went there to like enforce it. So like I guess like Lucy and Meacham were like the administrators, kind of like the presidents, but like, you know, like the elders and eldresses were rather like more so like enforcers that like kind of like dictated and like made sure, basically just made sure that the communities were doing what they were actually implementing. But yeah, so after this happens, Meacham passes away, which makes Lucy the primary authority figure for the Shakers. So they never actually ended up getting like a new primary father figure. Lucy ended up actually being it for like over 25 years till she died in 1821. And no Shaker would be designated as the mother or father after that as like the primary figure. Instead, they would just they would write down it was like the 125 rules like that governed every aspect of living in the Zion. And these 75 rules were like they were the first 125, but over time they incorporated more when new ones needed to be implemented or new ones needed to be like addressed. So that was basically like our overall understanding of the governance of the time or for the Shakers. Ray, do you have anything else you want to add?
I focused my portion of the question a lot on like the ministry, so the two eldresses and elders per community, which I think you talked about a good amount. But for myself, I added in just how I feel like after Mother and Lee died, they realized that the Shakers realized that they needed like a system or something that was more sustainable, and they had to come up with more of like a centralized governance structure for the community. So they established the ministry. I think that's what it was called, which consisted of the two eldresses and two elders who were responsible for overseeing like the entire community. So and I think the ministry was chosen by the community members, and they were responsible for ensuring that the community continued to follow like the Shaker principles and values. But they also were just responsible for stuff like I think managing finances for the community and just making decisions on behalf of them. But this centralized like power allowed the Shakers to I feel like it allowed them to make decisions more quickly and effectively, and it helped them to like maintain the unity of their communities too. So, yeah, that's pretty much what I had. Okay. And then for the next questions, um so C, it was drawing on Professor Sam Weinberg's comments in text one. Should we resist? What should we resist doing when reading about the Shakers or any other past group? Generally, how hard was it for you to emphasize with these folks? Um, I had to watch the video a few times to kind of comprehend what he was saying, and I'm not sure if I fully interpreted it right, but what I took away from it was we have to resist like judging or basing our opinion of like past historical events or figures, or like for this case Shakers, like we have to stop judging our opinion or putting it based off of the presence and now and like what we would think now in the current day, and think of it through the perspective of their history or like their time. So instead of being like your opinion of, oh, why would they do that, like or something, think about like why they actually might have done it and how it's a different time period. So um yeah, I just feel like it's more that we don't have much empathy because we don't understand why they did certain things. So it makes us think we don't have to agree, but I think it's important to kind of like open your mind and try and think about why maybe it was happening during that time. So, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, just kind of going off what you said. Definitely different times, and it definitely is hard for us to try and understand what they were going through at that time. But you know, kind of what I learned through Weinberg's video and his comments on it was like the historical perspective, and it really made me think about like the historical perspective of like even like any new religion like going into the world, like it's gonna get a lot of public backlash, like, and that goes for like newer religions like this or like the oldest religions that we know in the world. Like there's always going to be like public pushback, so like I definitely like see the empathy for like anybody that was like persecuted for like their religions that they were trying to start, because it's just what they like believed in. And like what happens in like history, like over time those religions end up being like accepted. And like in this, I think the author explains, I don't know exactly where he says it, but at some point like the settlers, once they started trading with people nearby that were like not followers of them, they at least like tolerated the culture, which is kind of like how I think about it in terms of like how other religions have been like tolerated. And then like in the present day, like most religions are always accepted. And that's just kind of how I saw that video. That's how it stood out to me.
Yeah, no, I agree. So then for the last question, D, to close, have someone read aloud the final two paragraphs of the chapter slowly. So I'll just read those first and then we can go to the questions. So the Shakers' aversion to the world as they found it and their exuberant millenarian hopes combined to liberate them from any regard for the established forms of human association. Within their villages, they built an entirely new kind of society, one founded upon total equality, spiritual transcendence, and a utopian faith in the perfectibility of life on earth. We are the people who turn the world upside down, Anley liked to say. Ultimately, life within Zion was less about what the Shakers did than about what they didn't do, namely just about everything that might be called worldly. To them, this state of total abstention, what they called being simple, added up to a doctrine of radical freedom, freedom from appetite, from nature, from impulse, and perhaps most important, from the conventions of the world. By scorching out the lusty, scuffling habits of Babylon, the Shakers hoped to perfect and liberate their souls and their community. Their best known song celebrates this remarkable paradox: I will bow and be simple, I will bow and be free. So for the questions, the first one is, what is the paradox in the song lyric? And then what did the Shakers mean by living simply? What is the paradox in the song lyric? And then how much do you emphasize emphasize with the Shaker philosophy as expressed in the song lyric? Here, let me see. So when I was reading the text, I took the Shakers' philosophy of living simply as their commitment to humility and self-sufficiency and their spiritual pursuits. So I think it was like examples are how the Shakers saw material excess and the pursuit of like worldly wealth as distractions from their spiritual goals, and they sought to live a life that reflected their devotion to God. So this involved like living in communal buildings that were designed to be like practical and um just like wearing simple things and having that simple lifestyle, practicing self-sufficiency through growing their own foods and making their own goods. So I just think it played a big role with just how the things they did and like their viewpoints with like material excess um played into their aspect of like living simply. But yeah, I think I took it as their simplicity and humility allowed for them to have a closer connection with God and like their spirituality. So, and they almost saw like the material world as distractions from their spiritual pursuits. So they sought to live in a way that reflected their commitment to God or like a higher power. So that's what I had for like that part of the question. Do you have anything you want to add to like the first part?
I mean, I think you hit like a lot of the key points, but like even like going back to like how they govern themselves. Like they used to like have their communities where they only had like 100 people living in that community. Like, and that was while also they found that like they could economically sustain and like thrive in that kind of setup. They also wanted to be like spiritually like involved like with everybody else living in that community too. So I think like that's a good area to look at to like how they really took like living simply to like an extreme, like that they didn't even want like more than a certain amount of people in a community because they wanted to really immerse themselves like with everybody's spirituality and not just be like a huge group of people living in one place. So I think that was another important part that I took away from that too. But yeah, other than that, I think you hit the other points well. So I think we're good.
Yeah.
So
All right.
that's the end of our discussion.
All right. Let's end it here.